Hello, this is Bernadette Russell and welcome to my podcast, How to Be Hopeful. This is episode 20 and this week, as it's a couple of weeks away till my book's published, I thought it would be great to revisit a conversation which I began with the wonderful David Harradine on the subject of grief, on how we deal with and find hope in the midst of grief. So I hope you enjoy our conversation. Thank you so much for listening.
I'm David Harradine. I'm at home in a village called Tockwith, which is in North Yorkshire in the UK. And I'm good. The weather here is atrocious. It feels kind of like late March, which is funny, just as some sort of lockdown easing has happened. The weather has sent us back inside again. I think the weather knows more than the Prime Minister.
It's funny though, isn't it? Because we should say as well today, it's the 11th of June today, and it's the same here in London, David. It's kind of gone back to sort of early spring or something. But that's an interesting interpretation that we've been encouraged to go back inside. You do have a very nice view though, which you showed me earlier.
I do. I feel really lucky. So I live in a little village which is quite close to the city of York. It's in the flat bit of Yorkshire, so it's a really flat agricultural landscape, but there's a lot of space. There are very few people and a lot of dogs and cows and sheep. And a field full of alpaca, and the alpaca gave birth at the weekend, so there are baby alpaca in the village.
Oh my God.
It's a really good place to be just now.
And it's home. Am I right in saying that's home for you, David? That's where you grew up and...
Yeah, exactly. This is, it's not quite where I'm from. So the village that I grew up in is about 6 miles from here. My parents are there still. My two brothers are still there. And I'm close enough to see them every day, but I'm not so close that my mum turns up without checking that I'm in first.
Yeah, that sounds like a perfect scenario. Oh, lovely.
Well, I'm sorry, I really love you. I'll do what you want whenever you want. Just please call first.
Oh, and it was your mum's birthday yesterday.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, she was 81.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Is she in fine fettle?
Her fettle is pretty good, you know. I mean, you know, she's 81. There's all sorts going on, but no, she said she had a bad back because she'd been down the garden pulling nettles up all afternoon. So, you know, take that as my answer to the question about her health. She's good.
If she can pull up nettles all afternoon, she's doing all right. So obviously I want to go on and talk about your amazing work and introduce everybody to that. But as you know, I'm sort of the podcast and my sort of focus of my thinking and work at the moment is hope. So I'm asking people who I'm speaking with over this season to think a little bit about if there might be anything that's happened this week or in the last 7 days that's made them feel hopeful and or happy. Now, it goes without saying there might be nothing, and that's absolutely fine too, but I just thought it might be quite nice for people to hear what kind of different things have been making people feel hopeful this week.
Well, I'm gonna answer that question.
Yeah.
With the first thing that came into my mind, which I think I'm surprised that this is the answer that I'm giving. So, but anyway, it's what I have felt certainly happy and probably hopeful if I think about it. So I'm quite an avid bird watcher. I always have been since I was a little kid, and I'm super happy that I live here because there's a lot of life that can be witnessed if you just keep your eyes open and look out for it. And I think on Tuesday there was a bird which doesn't live in the UK, and it's called a rose-coloured starling, and it's a starling which has got bright pink wings.
Oh my goodness, I didn't know there was such a thing.
Right, and like a beautiful crest on the top of its head. And I can't remember where they actually live, maybe in Scandinavia or maybe even in Russia, or I might be totally wrong, I might live in Southern Europe, I'm not sure actually. But one somehow had turned up about a mile from where I live and was in a cherry tree eating unripe cherries. And it just, I don't know, when you asked that question about what has given me hope, I think I just had an image of the possibility of something tiny and incredibly fragile that probably weighs like 3 ounces or something, weighs almost nothing apart from air, the weight of air. That such a tiny little fragile thing can have somehow got thousands and thousands of miles away from home safely and could just have set up home in a new place in this cherry tree, and that this thing that doesn't belong here, and I say that if you could see my fingers in big kind of quote marks, this thing that doesn't belong here arrived here, and its arrival was a source of absolute joy for lots and lots of people who heard about it, and the possibility of us greeting people or things from afar with joy and excitement made me really happy, because we haven't seen a lot of that recently.
No, that's so beautiful. I've just had a look at a picture on my phone of the bird, David, and it's incredible.
They're nice, aren't they?
Yes, so pretty. And actually, it's according to Wikipedia, it says the breeding range of this bird is in steppes, semi-deserts, and deserts of Central Asia and Southeast Europe. Can be found from northwestern Mongolia to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, southern Russia, Ukraine, Azerbaijan. That's incredible. That's quite a journey. And apparently, it is a strong migrant that winters in India and in tropical Asia. That's extraordinary. Well, yes, no, I had to look it up because I was like, that's a lovely thing and a beautiful thought to have been inspired by that. More of that. More of that. Yeah, it's lovely actually. It just made me think. I know it's a bit of a sidebar, but I'm not knowledgeable about birds at all, even though my uncle and my granddad was. But I have, like a lot of people, felt super connected to and engaged with birds during the period that we were all locked down, and sort of really enjoyed that and started to try to learn to recognise some songs and recognise some other birds. And I think what you've obviously it's been a lifetime thing for you, but I think for a lot of us who it hasn't been, it's been a real treat to start being able to connect with that.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of there have been positives in lockdown and things that have come out of it which unexpectedly have turned out to be really good things. And one of them, and I think what you just said speaks to it, is that everybody has just had to really, really, really slow down, and everyone's worlds have shrunk. Well, not everyone's, obviously, but many people's worlds have shrunk. And I certainly have. I feel like I've really opened my eyes, like, because my range has shrunk. I've really been paying attention to what there is in the place that I live in a way that I never have before, and that just feels so positive, because
it does, doesn't it? It feels like we're considering, we're looking deeper rather than further, rather than a long way. We're looking deeply and in a focused way.
Yeah, and carefully.
Yeah, and carefully, both inward and outward. So they do feel like amazing things. Yeah, I've been noticing quite a lot of woodpeckers, which in central London's pretty extraordinary to be able to.
Yeah, really. Yeah. Where are you? Are you in Deptford?
I'm in Deptford, so I go to Oxley's Woods pretty much every day, and it's and I've done a lot of field recordings actually, because it's a glorious cacophony of joyful bird shouting, as I call it. Very brilliant, and lots of.
It's good because that's what it is as well. Bird song is basically bird aggro. It is bird shouting. Birds go, get out, get off my land.
Exactly.
They're pretty pissed off with each other when they're singing at each other.
Yeah, but so beautifully. I went to a festival in Wigtown several years ago, and I went on an RSPB walk really early in the morning. But at the beginning of just sort of thinking, I really want to find out a bit more about birds. And the RSPB lady said, listen to the robins in this tree here. We were listening and we were expecting her to say something beautiful and profound. She said, they're basically telling each other to F off. And there was this beat of pause in this group of people who were mainly sort of elderly and quite conservative, I suppose you'd say. And then everyone just fell about laughing. And it was delightful.
Yeah, and it's true.
Yeah. But they make it sound great. Well, that's lovely, actually. Yeah, I was going to talk to you about positives, but we've done the end at the beginning, which is lovely. I want no, not at all. Nothing to be sorry for. It's really nice to have a segue into birds. So in your professional life, David, and I think not the way we met, but one of the ways we've connected is you're the co-director of Fevered Sleep, which is would you describe it as an arts organisation?
Yeah, I would. Yeah.
And could you tell us a little bit, first of all, about the company and your work in general? I know you produce loads of stuff, so that's probably a huge question. But just what the history of Fevered Sleep's been a little bit so far.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's our 25th anniversary next year in 2021. So,
wow!
Yeah, I know. I've been around for a while. I've only ever had one job, and that's it. So, yeah, I'm co-artistic director. The other artistic director is my best friend, my best mate, Samantha Butler. And we went to university together, and when we graduated nearly 25 years ago, we decided that we would set up a company, and that's Fevered Sleep. And so we've done all sorts. But I guess when we started out, we were mostly making theatre and performance, and we still do that quite a lot, but we work across different art forms. So we've published books, and we make films and installations, and all sorts of different projects, most of which are, I guess, participatory. And by that, actually, I just mean we make projects with other people, mostly with people who are not professional artists or who don't work in the arts sector like we do. And our recent projects have been a dance piece, a shop which sells clothing, and I think we're going to come on and talk about that.
Yeah.
And and a film. Yeah, we do all sorts.
It's lovely, and I'll make sure that at the end people can find out more about you, because you've done a huge variety of very, very incredible, beautiful, funny, moving, fantastic work. And I think, I was thinking actually, there's always an invitation implicit to sort of join in a big or in a small way, a really gentle invitation in all of your work, which I think is really lovely, and a lot of wit, which I enjoy. But yeah, I suppose the connection we made in terms of my Hope investigation, one project that you did felt really pertinent to the things that I was considering about, and that was your project called This Grief Thing. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit about that and how that came to be.
As you know, I'll start with the second half of that question, because that might be the easiest way to answer it. How it came to be. So I have three siblings. Two of them are alive, and one of them is dead. And my sister Julie died 8 years ago. And I kind of at the time in the aftermath of her death, when I was trying to work out how to kind of continue with my life, I felt incredibly lucky that I work in the arts, and I happen to work with people and have a lot of friends who also work in the arts, who are all really good at communicating and really empathetic and really kind of in touch with their emotions. And so they were really super, super supportive, and everybody was kind of checking in, asking how I was, asking how my parents were, and that was immensely important for me and helpful. At the same time, I witnessed that my parents were having the opposite experience. My mum, I know it's a cliche, and it's kind of the kind of thing that you see in films or in TV cameras, but she literally would come back from the supermarket and give the list of people who that time had seen her and turned their trolley round and gone, because it was easier for them to let her see them turn their backs on her than it was for them to talk to her and ask her how she was, given that her daughter had just died. So I had this incredible network of support, and her equivalent was just loads of people avoiding her, and nobody asking her how she was, nobody acknowledging that her daughter had just died. So this was really present for me, this disparity between our different experiences. And then what happened was a few months passed, and kind of one by one, I noticed, all right, okay, my friends have stopped checking in and stopped asking how I am, and they've stopped asking how my mum is. And is this because I'm supposed to be okay? Am I supposed to have stopped grieving by now? I didn't get that message. I wasn't aware that was supposed to have happened. And I think a combination of me experiencing that and then that against what my mum had experienced, I just got really, really pissed off, actually. Just really pissed off and disappointed with people. And I was talking with Sam, the other half of Fevered Sleep, Sam, my best friend Sam, about it. And I just said to her, look, I'm so upset and pissed off that people are not acknowledging that I'm still grieving. I want to get a T-shirt that says, I'm still grieving. Why have you stopped talking about it? And Sam said, that's a really good idea. We should just do that. Why don't we just do that? Why don't we just make you that T-shirt? And maybe that's a project as well. And in lots of ways, that's what this brief thing is. So to talk about, do I have time to talk a little bit about the project?
Gosh, please do. Yes.
To kind of elaborate from that T-shirt that I wanted for myself to a whole project, which is actually for other people, although it has, of course, been really important to me. So basically, this grief thing, at the heart of it is a collection of clothing. So there's T-shirts and jumpers and scarves, and also like badges and brooches, different things. And some things like postcards and like condolence cards that you might send to somebody who is grieving. But all these different objects that are part of the project, they each carry like a phrase or a word, a proposal of a way to think about grief. So they might say something like, grief is like the weather, or don't panic if I cry, or let me be sad, or grief equals love, all these different phrases. And when we do the project, we open temporary shops. So we'll take over an empty shop or a unit in a shopping centre for a couple of weeks or a few weeks. We sell this stuff, which is on a pay what you want basis. So people might pay nothing for something, or they might pay, whatever they want to for something. And then the shop also becomes a place in which we can have conversations about grief with people. And often that's just really ad hoc. Like people will literally come into the shop to talk, and they'll just start talking at the counter. Sometimes it's a bit more formal, so we do these things called grief gatherings, where we kind of advertise times when people can come together in a small group of like 12 people and talk with us for a little bit of time about grief. But mostly it's just a space and a project which tries to make grief visible, tries to acknowledge that death and grief are really, really common and really, really normal. So the whole project is just about trying to make grief visible and trying to normalise it. I guess just saying to people that it's okay. It's okay to grieve. It's okay for your grief to be expressed. There's nothing unhealthy about that. In fact, it's really healthy to allow such a strong and natural emotion to become visible for other people. Because I guess we've talked a lot also about how grief is a social act. Like it is. Grief is always about a relationship between a person and another person, whether it's a person who's alive and a person who's died, or whether it's people in a family or in a community who are grieving together. So there's something about making this space, and it's a shop for a reason. It's a really ordinary space. Everyone goes shopping. There's nothing mystical or magical about shops.
Which actually makes it very comfortable, I would imagine. Its ordinariness is useful.
Yeah, I hope so. I think, no, I mean, I know that it is because people have said that. People have, because often people come in and go, what's this? Like, what the hell is this weird thing? And we explain that we're artists and it's kind of an art project, and we talk a little bit about what we're trying to do. And lots of people have said, I would never go and watch a play about death and grief. I'd never go to an art gallery to look at an exhibition about grief. But I was just going to Boots. I was just going to the greengrocers, and I saw you, and I thought I'd pop in. And now that I'm here, can I tell you that my dad died last week? And then the conversation unfolds, and its ordinariness is part of what's important about it, and I think part of what's powerful about it.
Oh yeah, I'm very that the whole power of the ordinary is endlessly fascinating, isn't it? But one of the things that I was really fascinated in, I couldn't stop thinking about it, David, was the fact that you sort of, with the T-shirts, with the sort of visible things that people are able to wear and put on, and therefore might provoke a conversation or even thinking, was that they just seemed incredibly useful. And as I think we've spoken about it before, but I was aware that, we used to have in Victorian England, we would have visible indicators that we were in grieving. We'd have black armbands, or we'd be wearing a veil, or we'd have black clothes, and that meant a particular thing. And that I just thought that was one of the as many things that was one of the things that made it really powerful, is that we have. I'm not idealising sort of Victorian society in any way, but the fact that people knew, I imagine, was immensely helpful, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And the project is really conscious of that history, and that example, which is an example that lots of people are aware of, the Victorian mourning dress. That is just one example of lots and lots of different historical practices or contemporary practices that happen in this country and my culture, but also in other countries and other cultures. And whether that's whether that's a Victorian woman wearing black and then heliotrope, which is a different colour, like the next stage, and then all these different shades of mourning dress before she can wear whatever. Whether it's that, whether it's somebody getting a tattoo with their mum's name across their heart, or whether it's someone tearing a hole in their clothes, which is a Jewish tradition. They all do the same thing, and I think what they're all trying to do is to put grief, or like the state of bereavement and grieving, to put it really visibly on the surface of the body, so that it can't be ignored, so that it can't be denied, or to invite people to acknowledge it, like to make a declaration. I'm grieving.
And did it feel to you, going through that experience and in discussion with Sam, that's part of the problem in our sort of broadly secular space, contemporary space, that we don't have those things, that's part of the problem? I mean, was that partly why what happened with your mum happened, do you think, or why people stopped asking you? It was because the rules or the acknowledgement of the way that we are supposed to or allowed to behave aren't very clear, are they?
No, definitely. And if I'm honest, I have mixed feelings about it, because it's interesting that you just used the word rules. And when I was talking about the different stages of colour of like a Victorian mourning dress, I heard myself say that a woman would wear all these colours before she's allowed to wear what she wants, and it kind of was like that. I think partly also that was a way for women to be controlled in the process, and I do think that a lot of the rituals that we have had, and a lot of the rituals that have marked really important rites of passage, whether that's birth or the union of two people, or whether it's death, because so many of those rituals have had their roots in religion, as so many people have stepped away from religion or never been in it in the first place. I don't think we've done a very good job of inventing rituals to take their place. And I think there's a piece of work to do there, actually. I think
I do. I feel like I have a very strong feeling, I have had for a while actually, that this feeling, like this yearning and sort of human need for and pleasure that is taken in ritual, and the safety that ritual provides, and the honour and the sort of respect that ritual endows, which is missing from secular ways of being, is something that we're all going to be really getting on. It feels like I've had so many conversations with people, and you find people almost exploring it, like different kinds of ritual, borrowing things a little bit in a way of sort of, because they can support us when we're celebrating or hurting, can't they? They can help us with that. And did you, in your experience, I mean, obviously you'll have had many experiences doing this, but what were your sort of headlines, discoveries in terms of what people were talking to you about and telling you? Were there things that seemed to be common?
Yeah, right. Yes, the thing that you just said, definitely. A lot of I think almost everybody who we've spoken to has expressed some version of sadness or disappointment or anger about the fact that their grief isn't acknowledged. And I think closely related to that, a lot of people talk about having a sense from other people that it kind of needs to stop now. You've kind of been grieving for long enough, and you should be over it by now. Why are you still crying all the time? Why are you still talking about that person who died such a long time ago? 5 months ago now. You really need to be back to normal.
Oh.
So a lot of variations of that. Just this frankly ridiculous notion that grief has a time frame and that it shouldn't take too long. A lot, and I think what's related to that, a lot of people, to the extent that one I remember really vividly when we had a shop in Manchester, a person came into that shop. It was really extraordinary. She must have known that we were there before she came in, and she literally walked up to the counter, and I was behind the counter. Sam was doing something else, and she just said to me, I've been feeling like this, I've been doing that, I've been thinking this, is that normal? And I said to her, yeah, of course. I think whatever you're thinking and feeling is normal because it's what you need to be thinking and feeling. And she went, okay, great, thank you, and walked out again. Yeah. And so there's something about, because we're not really taught about death and grief in schools, because people are afraid of acknowledging it and therefore afraid of expressing it. We don't talk about it enough with our friends or our families. When you see grief in a film or a TV show, I think it tends to be the same sort of narrative. There's a certain arc to that story, which I think tends to get repeated. People just don't know what they're supposed to do. Like, people start to question. A recurring theme is, am I grieving in the wrong way? Am I supposed to feel like this at this point in time? Is it okay that I'm feeling like this? And it makes me really, really sad that people have that question. Because I think what we find ourselves saying over and over and over again, as I said to that woman in Manchester that I've just told you about, is grief is not a thing. Like, grief isn't a thing like baking a cake is a thing where you kind of have to do certain things in the process to get a cake to come out of the oven. Grief is a new, well, the way that I talk about it, actually, and certainly my experience, is that grief is a new reality which you suddenly find yourself in. And the old reality doesn't exist anymore. And in this new reality, it's almost like being born all over again. And I don't mean that in a religious way. It's almost like entering into your life or waking up or opening your eyes for the first time, going, how do I do this? How do I live in this version of my life when that person is no longer part of it? And that's a lifelong piece of work. That's a process that is never. That's a process. It's a process that is never going to end. It's not a act of grieving which will stop at some point. Which I think is still how some people think about it.
That's very interesting. It's a really powerful analogy, because it made me think, it's almost like you've gone into another country, and actually you need other people to come with you in order to be with you, don't you? You need. So if they're still trying to pull you back to the old version, that's not going to. There's going to be a bit of sort of tension there. I wonder if you think, David, from your experience and Sam's experience of both your own grief and of speaking to people and having this amazing project, what do you think we need to do? Is it about making space that we can just start to have a conversation? How can we make this better for everyone?
I think it is largely what you just said. I think we just need to get better and braver at acknowledging that grief exists and that it's normal for it to exist and that it's okay for it to exist. Nobody wants to be grieving. I'm not celebrating it or pretending that it's a positive thing to be grieving. It's not. It's shit because somebody's died. But people die. We're all going to die. So grief is as normal as that. It's just a fact. And for something which is just so plain and ordinary, we really are rubbish at even beginning to know how to approach it. And I think the first step is simply that people need to get braver, actually, and just approach it. And that all that might mean in practice is just saying to somebody, how are you feeling today? Or I know that it's, maybe to acknowledge certain dates, or to not even to have to carry all that knowledge of certain dates. It's not about that. It's not about, it doesn't have to turn into a big difficult task. It's just about acknowledging it, I think.
Sounds like it's about checking in and then again, isn't it, as well?
It's about checking in and then checking in again.
Yeah.
And then keeping checking in, and then 10 years later, just checking in every now and again. Definitely. And it is a piece of work. So I've got, it's interesting that we're talking today because just yesterday I added some dates. So on the very back page of my diary, I keep a paper diary, and I keep a list of all the dates when people died. Therefore, all the dates when I know that one of my friends or relatives will be thinking about that person. And so every time I get to the new year, I write in all these dates. So I know that on the 5th of March, I need to check in with this person, or the 20th of November, I need to just send a little message to that person. In the same way that I put people's birthdays in my diary, because it seems totally equivalent to me. Like, if we want to celebrate people's birthdays, we need to also acknowledge the days on which people might be feeling particularly bereft or sad or thinking about somebody who's died. And yeah, that's a piece of work, but no more than sending a birthday card, which we all seem perfectly capable of doing most of the time.
I think it's a really simple and strong thing to say, to have courage. And it's also, I guess it's worth knowing, we have to acknowledge this continually, that we're all different. So someone else might not want to talk, someone else might want to talk all night. So it's accepting that, isn't it? And so that's why you ask, because then you give that person the opportunity to say, do you know what, I don't want to talk about it, or actually, do you mind if we look at a photo album?
Because what I am definitely not saying is that I think everybody who's grieving needs to be talking about their grief all the time. I'm not saying that. And what I am saying is that the people who kind of surround and hold, both literally and metaphorically, hold and support those people who are grieving, it's the responsibility of them to make an invitation in which a space might open up if that space is wanted, and if it isn't wanted, that's okay. And there's a risk that comes with that, and there's a risk of misjudging it that comes with that. And I actually think that people are largely afraid of the risk. I actually think that people are not afraid of grief. I think people are very afraid of getting it wrong when it comes to other people's grief. But that is, I think I just, yeah, at the end of the day, I just think, okay, so there are two risks here. There's the risk of not saying anything to somebody who needs to have their grief acknowledged, or there's the risk of making that acknowledgement and that person going, I don't want to talk about that. And then you have to deal with a little feeling of rejection and like, oh, I've done a bad thing. But it's always better to take the second risk.
Yeah, we just have to risk it. I mean, that applies to everything. It's also about forgiving yourself if you get it wrong, isn't it? Because we're not perfect. We're flawed. So it's partly accepting that you might be a bit clumsy, you might get it wrong. What you think is the right thing to do, that's okay, because we're all just doing our best. So I think it's really sort of worth saying that and acknowledging that it sort of takes courage because it does. When we were speaking before, David, you said something really beautiful. I think I might have been in my funny little writing cave, and it's near Christmas, and I said to you, acknowledging that it's kind of audacious in a way to bring hope into this conversation. But you said to me, I don't know if you remember saying it. You said that grief can coexist with a kind of wild hope, which is such a beautiful thing to say. It stayed with me, and I thought a lot about wild hope and written quite a lot about wild hope since. So I'm sorry to land that on you because I don't know if you remember saying it, but I just wondered if you think... I suppose I'm interested in the idea of hope in extremis, at times when we're in pain or when it's spaces where you think actually despair might be the thing that's really going on, and whether there is any hope in that place of grief, and if there is, if it's useful.
I don't think that there is always hope in that place of grief. I think there always can be, and I think it usually arrives when it is ready to arrive. I definitely think that grief does coexist with all the other emotions. It doesn't erase everything else, although it might erase everything else for certain periods of time or at certain times. And I'm not just talking about, it might erase everything else for the immediate time after someone's died, that it might erase everything else 25 years after somebody's died. It's not linear, it resurfaces in all sorts of ways. But it's just a fact. I'm sorry to say it, it's just a fact because I live it, and so do millions of other people. You can be in the thick of bereft grief and feel joy, like turning on a sixpence, or almost simultaneously. Grief and joy, grief and hope, grief and happiness, grief and anger, grief and frustration. They all coexist. And in terms of hope,
I was just thinking it circles back a little bit to an earlier conversation we had before we were recording, in a way, about your sister's oak tree. If you don't mind me mentioning your sister's oak tree, because I sort of struggled with thinking about, because I'm not religious, so I don't sort of have any belief. It's not in my belief system to have a sort of afterlife. So it took me a while to find any hope when I lost my grandparents, and they were both really keen gardeners. So I suppose the acknowledging to me that we don't, in a real way, we don't really disappear was where I found a little bit of hope, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, do you want me to tell you about the oak tree?
If you don't mind, yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, I don't mind. I might even rustle it a little bit.
Yeah.
No pun intended, Brenda. I don't know.
Oh, that sounds nice.
I've got on my desk, I've got just like the end of a branch of quite a young oak tree, and it's got its autumn leaves just before they fell off, so they're all brown and crispy, which is what. And I snipped it off the oak tree, which is on my sister's grave. And when we planted, so she died 8 years ago, and when we planted it, it was maybe 3 or 4 feet tall. I'm 6 foot tall. It's now more than twice my height. So maybe it's about 15 foot tall now, above the ground. And, trees are symmetrical, so I'm assuming that it goes down about 15 feet as well, and we'll have the kind of spread of the roots will be similar to the spread of the branches. And so it's just a fact that those roots will have grown around and next to and through my sister's body. It's just a fact. And that therefore, in this little piece of twig and these leaves that I keep on my desk, there are particles of her. And I don't mean that in a supernatural, kind of spiritual, religious sense. It's just, I mean that in a really straightforward physical, biological sense, that this tree will have absorbed her. She is in this tree in a transformed state and is therefore continuing to produce life, continuing to produce joy in my life, continuing to be physically present in my life and my parents' life and all of the lives of the people who visit that tree and touch it and visit her.
And what a glorious life as well, an oak tree. I mean, such a beautiful tree and such long livers. Yeah, there's very big healthy rose bushes planted on and in my grandparents. So I found that sort of immensely comforting. It made me. There's a lovely Edvard Munch quote. I hope I'm not going to misquote it, but I think he says, "In my rotting body, flowers will grow, and I am in them, and that is eternity," which is sort of beautiful, and it is really comforting because I think even if you absolutely do have the belief system or a faith that means you believe that you'll arrive in heaven with your consciousness fully intact or you'll go to a better place, that's still true of your body, isn't it? So that feels like a thing that perhaps we can all be unified in, that knowledge and belief that that we can become something else. And I also think it was really beautiful what you talked about things being able to coexist, because I know that I've had friends that have felt really desperately worried and despairing that they're always just going to be in the dark room, as my friend calls it. And you can apply the same to depression. But I think knowing that things can coexist, as you said, you can be joy can coexist with grief, happiness can coexist with grief. That for me, there's hope there. I was just thinking for someone that's listening who might feel in a really dark place, it's possible to experience more than one thing. We're very complex, aren't we? And capable of lots of different feelings at once.
Yeah, definitely. And we're inherently resilient. Like, we have a really strong urge to survive and to survive emotionally too. And I said that everything in the shop in the project has got these different words and phrases, and I think I said that each of those words or phrases has been taken directly from conversations that we've had with people. We didn't just think them up; they're things that people have said to us. And one of them is just a little card, actually, that just says "There will be joy again." And that I remember the conversation. I remember the person who said it. I remember where we were sitting when we were having a conversation with some people, and we said to them, "Has anybody ever said something to you which was really important to you when you were grieving?" And one person who had experienced this really, really terrible kind of double loss of two people that they were incredibly close to within a really short amount of time said that the single most important thing that anybody ever said to me was, "There will be joy again." And in that conversation, he then said, "And I can report back that there is. I am full of joy so much of the time." And when he said that to me, I really needed to hear that, because I was questioning whether that could be possible. And I can also confirm that my life is full of joy, even though I look at that bit of oak tree and profoundly wish that my sister was still here. I'm full of joy, and there can be joy again.
Oh, it's beautiful. Bless that man for saying that, being so generous as to share that. Yeah. I was actually going to ask you. I think you've answered a lot of this. I suppose one of the things that's come up when I've had conversations with other people connects to what we were saying, David, about having the courage being brave enough to ask how someone is and being prepared to get that wrong, and as you said, making sure you're just present and you're checking in.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any other advice you would give to anyone that's listening who's just trying to be a good friend to someone who is grieving, particularly in the sort of early stages of that? I think a lot of people have certainly said to me, I literally I don't know what to say. Mm-hmm. Everything feels like a cliche, that kind of.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, in terms of that, I actually think it's really okay to say, I don't know what to say. I think that's a really useful phrase. And I think it's really okay to say to people, I don't know what to say, but I just wanted to say something, or I don't know what to say, but I just needed to acknowledge that you're grieving. I think that is a really helpful phrase. One of the conversations we had, somebody said something that I thought was brilliant, which is that when he meets or speaks to a friend or a relative who he knows is bereaved and grieving, he really tries to avoid saying to them, how are you? Because that's a really difficult question. How are you? And he says, how are you today? Because that's a much easier question, because the stakes are much lower in answering that question, because how are you today is obviously acknowledging that it's going to change. It's different yesterday. It's going to be different tomorrow. It's an easier question to answer. So that felt like a brilliant little tip. Something else somebody said that I thought was a brilliant tip as well was kind of half of a warning and half of a really practical tip. And the warning part of it was, don't ever say to somebody, you can call me anytime, unless they can really call you anytime. Don't say to somebody, call me anytime, and then when they call you at 4 a.m, you don't answer the phone because you're asleep, or then you haven't left your phone. You put your phone on silent. So that's one thing. If you're going to say that, you really have to mean it. And if somebody does say that to you, and you know that they really mean it, write down their phone number or write down their name and put it on a piece of paper next to your bed. So if you're grieving and if you wake up feeling bereft at 4 a.m. and you need to speak to somebody, there's a little reminder that whoever it is really meant it when they said, you can call me anytime, and pick up your phone and call them. Just pick up your phone and call them.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's worth considering if you mean it before you say it, isn't it? Because sometimes you can say things like that and you do mean it, but it's worth considering, okay, what does this actually mean? Am I going to literally...
It's kind of a stock phrase. It's a shorthand. It's a shorthand for saying, I'm here for you and I care about you.
Yeah.
You can say that in fewer words if you say, call me anytime. Yeah. I think that. And then just practical things. Sometimes it's really hard to go shopping. It's really hard to take the dog for a walk, or you don't want to go shopping because you don't want to have the people avoiding you in the supermarket shtick going on, or so just offering to help practically.
And maybe you don't feel like washing up, or it's that kind of stuff. But those kind of practical things can be enormously helpful, can't they?
And sorry, I know that I'm talking a lot, but can I say one?
Do.
And it feels important to say it because so much of what we've been talking about, and I think what the project and how I've described the project might make it might suggest that I think everybody needs to be talking about grief all the time. That is not what I'm saying. I think we need to get better at acknowledging grief, but sometimes that might just mean that you need to touch somebody, you need to hold somebody's hand, you need to give somebody a hug. You don't need to get into a great big emotional conversation about something. Acknowledgement comes in all shapes and forms, some spoken and some unspoken. And sometimes the unspoken ones are easier.
Yeah, and it circles back to what we were saying earlier, I suppose, about being open and aware of the fact that we are all different. We have different needs. We have different wants. We have different ways of expressing ourselves. So, yeah, I think it's really, really important to know that. And sometimes it's just good to sit next to someone, isn't it?
Yeah,
to
exactly.
Just kind of be next to someone.
Yeah, exactly.
In this is quite a big question, but it's something I'm sort of quite interested in. I don't even know if it's possible to answer this. I don't know whether I'd be able to, but obviously you are incredibly brave and courageous artist, as is Sam, and you do not shy away from completely squaring on difficult subjects, challenging things, which is what all great art does, is what you do. And I just wondered, do you think that art, in the broadest sense of that, can actually contribute to very real and radical, lasting, positive change and transformation, both for individuals and for society? Do you think art can be one of the tools that can be really effective to do that?
Yes. And I've got nothing more to say on the matter. I definitely think it can. And actually, when you asked that question, you made a point of saying art in the broadest sense, and I think that my answer is in keeping with your question, because I don't. For me, art isn't a thing which is produced, like a product, whether that's a shop and a collection of clothing, or whether it's a painting, or whether it's a performance, or whatever the artwork might be. For me, the art isn't in the kind of object or the outcome of all of that. The art is in how that thing meets people, and how people meet that thing, and what sorts of thinking and feeling and experiences of living an artist might bring to that thing. So I feel that art, in its truest sense, when it isn't just about objects, but it's about ways of thinking and ways of being, is just really, really, really deeply rooted in the simple act of being alive. They're indivisible. It's not a coincidence that one of the first things that humans evolved to do was to make art, to make things that made some sort of music, or to make images on cave walls, or to invent rituals. And so, yeah, I do. I think in as much as art is an expression of all of our potential and possibility and hope for a different reality, I think it's immensely powerful and political and can be radically transformative. I really hope so, because that's why I'm an artist. And
Me too. I think it's always worth us considering, isn't it? And it's a good thing to sort of ask. And I think it's been made vividly apparent in the last few months that it is, and that it's important to people, and that it helps in all sorts of ways, not least for joy and for positive mental health. Yeah. I've sort of really enjoyed seeing all the creative expressions of everybody, and I've really enjoyed the fact that it looks like people have had time to do creative stuff that they might not have had time to do before. So I feel sort of really encouraged by that. And in a sort of longer lens, looking out at the wider world, David, do you have what are your hopes for the future for yourself and for the community, and in fact the whole wide world? I think I sent to you, and I sent the question. I've been reading Charles Eisenstein's book, The More Beautiful World That Our Hearts Know Is Possible, which is a fantastic title and also a brilliant book. He's wonderful. But I thought, if given that the title of that brilliant book is a sort of nice little touchstone, what would a more beautiful world be like for you? What would you hope for in the future? It's a really big question.
It's a big question. Do you know what popped in my head when you were answering the question? And this might not mean anything to certain people who are listening, and I'm sorry if it doesn't, but there's the TV series on Netflix, RuPaul's Drag Race, which is a competition between drag artists, and every week in each episode there's a challenge, and RuPaul, who is the host, has this repeated mantra where he says before each challenge, "Good luck and don't fuck it up."
Yes, he does, yes.
Yeah, right. And as you were asking the question, I was thinking, if we could rewind through 100,000 years of human history, and RuPaul was there, all dragged up, and he said to those early humans, "Good luck and don't fuck it up,"
That is one of the most fantastic things anyone has ever said to me. The idea of RuPaul in his splendiferousness, standing at the sort of mouth of a cave.
Exactly. I mean, he transcends human evolution. So clearly it's possible for him to have been there back at the start, or them to have been there back at the start of it all. But obviously, we have really, really, really fucked it up. And it's like, these people who enter that competition, they imagine themselves into different versions of themselves. They make themselves different and beautiful and passionate and compassionate, and they don't fuck it up. And as a species, we have, on the whole, I think, really fucked it up. And but you can always, it is always possible to
unfuck
it and to reset it and to wash your face and wipe it off and put it on again differently and try harder. And I don't know, Bernadette, I don't know whether as a species we have the capacity to do that, whether we've got the strength and the determination and the kindness and the strength of hope that we might do that. But I see incredible people who are trying to drive for that to happen. I also see the scale of the challenge that we've got to overcome and all the different challenges that are stacking on top of each other and related to each other. And it's a really bloody monumental task.
It is. I find more and more I'm trying to sort of reconnect with history, because I find the long lens of history to be really useful, because sometimes I think, oh my gosh, we've never been in such a mess. There's never been so many things to climb, and you can make that argument very strongly, and it would be difficult to contest it. However, during the Black Death, if I, as a peasant, which I was then, would have been, trudging through the messy jam of my dead neighbours through fields, at that time the problems would have seemed as immense and as difficult and awful, and yet we came through. And we also do make a really big effort to sort out the messes we've made, and we don't always mean to have made such a terrible mess. For example, I always think about plastic, David. I think plastic wasn't invented to destroy the oceans. It wasn't. It was meant to help us. It just went a bit wrong, and now we're trying to fix it. So I hope, if the world's made of sort of the energy of people like you and Sam and RuPaul, with all that, artistry, creativity, imagination, and what you said then about having those beautiful contestants just saying, I'm going to transform myself. There is hope there.
There's a huge amount of hope there, and I'm not a pessimist. I'm very deeply optimistic, because I also think the default setting of the world, for sure, and maybe the universe, I don't know enough to know about that. It's too big, I can't get it in my head. But the default setting is beauty. It's like that. We talked about that rose-coloured starling that unexpectedly turned up right at the start of when we were chatting, and I've been talking about my sister's oak tree, and you were talking about your grandparents' rose bushes, and my sister and your grandparents were good, kind people. But even bad, stupid, wicked people can turn into rose bushes, and rose-coloured starlings can rise from the grave of the bad people of the world. It just takes time. And that fills me with immense hope that what is bad can be recycled into something good and beautiful. And that happens on an atomic level, but it also happens. It can happen. It can happen on a massive global scale. It is possible. I hope we can achieve it.
I'm sure we can. What a lovely way to draw towards the end of our conversation. So encouraging. I was just thinking about the sort of joy of, no disrespect intended, but of the grave of certain unmentionable global leaders being turned into a beautiful oak tree or a beautiful...
Yeah. And, his name came to my lips, but I refused to speak it. I would not sully the conversation with his name. So let's just focus on the starlings that'll come after he's gone.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we go, David, I know people will be super interested in your and Sam's work, all your many amazing projects, and I would recommend everybody checking it out. Men and Girls Dance is extraordinary, one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen. That's just one of the other projects. So where would be a sort of first stop, useful place to find out about Fevered Sleep, yours and Sam's company, and also how we might get involved in this grief thing, should we want to?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for what you said. I really appreciate that. Well, we have a one-stop shop. It's our website, which is feveredsleep.co.uk.
So simple.
That's got everything anybody might want to know, and if it's not on there and you want to know it, you can ping us an email through the website, and we love to connect with people. In terms of this grief thing, there's lots. It's a project that we're never going to stop doing. So the website again will give people an update on that, and we're trying to develop that project specifically in response to what's been happening in the world recently and all the additional grief and sense of loss and death and sadness which there is. So there'll be quite a lot happening with that project over the next few months. If people wanted to connect with us, we would be so happy to hear from them.
Thank you so much. You can go and watch RuPaul's Drag Race now.
I think we're watching season 10 for the 5th time. It's become a nightly lockdown ritual. At the end of the day, I can't get through this day without at least one time of hearing Ru say, "Good luck and don't fuck it up," and then I can go to sleep.
Well, on that note, I'm going to say goodbye to you and good luck to you and don't fuck it up.
Thank you.
Lots of love.
Lots of love. Bye. Bye.